Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Benjamin Chung Alfares with the top stories in the global economy. Coming up today, Russian economy suffers as investors fear military intervention in Ukraine, and Canadian postal workers protest end of home delivery. First, look at the headlines. Investors globally panicked as the standoff between Ukraine and Russia intensified. The threat of all-out war prompted Russia's central bank to increase its key interest rate to 7% from 5.5%. Russian stock markets opened down at least 6%, and the ruble plunged to historic new lows as investors panicked. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 index dropped 1.3%, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng declined 1.5%. We expound further on this story following the headlines. Manufacturing among Asia's major export economies stumbled in February, led by China, where new export orders fell as well. The HSBC Market Purchasing Managers Index on China manufacturing fell to a 7-month low of 48.5 in February. The PMI on South Korea fell to 49.8, marking the first contraction in 5 months. Japanese manufacturers are still strongly supported by aggressive stimulus policies, but marked their first decline in 7 months. Although the pace of China's expansion has slowed down, analysts believe the 7.5% economic growth target for 2014 remains achievable. Fighting in South Sudan has cut production from the country's lifeline oil fields by about 29%. Oil production dropped to 175,000 barrels a day from 245,000 before fighting began in mid-December. When South Sudan became independent from Sudan in 2011, it kept 75% of oil production. But pipelines and the Red Sea export terminal remain in the north. And hedge fund managers George Soros and John Paulson have both taken a €92 million stake in a new Spanish property investment vehicle called Hispania. Hispania, created by Spanish-based private investment firm Azora, will operate as a real estate investment trust, or REIT. REITs, locally known as SOCIMIs, are taking off in Spain as foreign investors search for real estate bargains following a 30% property price slump. George Soros has recently increased his investments in European real estate, including through the European property unit of U.S. real estate investment fund, Kennedy Wilson Holdings. Russia's stock markets and currency are weighed down by investors' fears of a military intervention in Ukraine. But while the European Union remains an appealing option for debt-ridden Ukraine, Moscow is concerned to lose a crucial trade partner. Daniel Roth has more in the following report.
I still have armies in the Ukraine.
Yeah, the Ukraine. The Ukraine is weak. It's feeble. I think it's time to put the hurt on the Ukraine.
I come from Ukraine. You not say Ukraine weak?
Yeah, well, we're playing a game here, pal.
Ukraine is game to you? How about I take your little bonus?
Once it may have seemed like something to joke about, but this is no laughing matter. With major turmoil erupting, the economic future of Ukraine is uncertain. 7% of the population's cash is rumored to have been withdrawn from the system, and on Friday a cap was set at $1,400 per day. The hryvnia has lost about 20% of its value since the beginning of the year. The International Monetary Fund is expected to step in within the next 2 months and be the major source of funds for the next 2 years.
Of course, there is a possibility of default for the country, but I guess that sovereign default is quite low-risk possibility at the moment. While there are some liquidity problems, most likely they will be overcome with the funds from the IMF.
The acting Ukrainian government has asked for $15 billion in aid, the amount that had been expected and then canceled after just $3 billion had arrived from Russia. Meanwhile, factories in some regions are reportedly closed down due to lack of orders. The government has been missing salary and pension payments, and the central bank has been printing extra money to finance the government. The situation on the street is dire.
We tried to use this ATM, but we couldn't get money. So we're going to try some other ATMs in the city center. There is another ATM here, but it's been broken during the clashes.
Russia has been aiming to stave off an agreement between the EU and Ukraine in order to assert its authority in the former Soviet bloc, though it is risking a steep currency slide due to the instability. The Russian stock market plummeted 10% on Monday, and Russia's central bank raised interest rates to 7% from 5.5%. The EU has said that despite the turmoil, they are ready to sign a deal and cited some of the benefits of jumping on board with them.
Over time, it will bring them quite a lot of benefits. We have figured out that once the agreement is in force, it would give them an additional income because they wouldn't have to pay custom duties anymore of about €500 million on a yearly basis. So that is important.
While the U.S. has called for a monitoring mission, it's clear that an economic fix is needed. Markets are sliding from the Nikkei to the S&P 500. Ukraine's national debt is at about $75 billion, double what it was in 2010 when Yanukovych took power. According to the acting government, they will need about $35 billion in loans over the next 2 years.
Joining us now in the studio is Paula Slyer, Middle East Bureau Chief of Russia Today TV. Ms. Slyer, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
So clearly, the Ukraine's fate is of great importance to Russia. On the one hand, because of Russian state-owned banks that have exposure to about $28 billion of debt, if I'm not mistaken. On the other hand, because all these Soviet-era gas lines run through the Ukraine to the EU. Given all of that, what kind of weight does the debt threat, so to speak, the gas debt threat of the ability for Russia to cut off gas whenever they want to the Ukraine, what kind of weight does it really carry?
It certainly carries a lot of weight. I mean, following on from what you say, you have Ukraine in the central of Europe, kind of forming a border between Russia and the rest of Europe. Hugely important, not only geographically, but historically and financially. Now, there are questions being raised whether President Putin will go the route again of cutting off gas to the Ukraine.
Right.
The Ukrainians currently owe the Russians more than $1 billion in debt for the Russian energy giant Gazprom. And there's no indication at this stage which route President Putin will go. He's obviously trying to read the political situation in the Ukraine, and if he finds it increasingly unstable, he could go that route, and that would put pressure certainly on the Ukrainians to come to the party. You also have a very, very important navy base, Russian navy, that is situated in the Crimea, and the route from Russia through the Crimea is its main route and its only route to the Mediterranean. So that is why you have Russian troops currently inside the Crimea, and that's why there's so much of a focus in terms of Putin not allowing that not to fall into the hands of Russia ultimately.
I just wanted to show our viewers now a map of the Ukraine and Russia and how the gas pipelines run through that area. You can actually see it right behind you. Clearly, this area is of great importance to Russia in terms of exports. Isn't the threat of cutting off gas to Ukraine, I mean, technically equally of importance to Russia? I mean, whatever happens to Ukraine clearly also affects their energy security, right?
Well, it certainly does, but interestingly enough, it also affects the energy security of Europe. More than 30% of oil and gas that is supplied to Europe actually comes from Russia initially. Right. So this is something that the European Union needs to think about, and the United States and the West in general, when it talks about applying sanctions on Russia. If Russia is angry enough, those sanctions, and we can get to discuss that, what impact they'll have. But ultimately, Europe is going to also feel the brunt of any kind of Russian cutting off of gas to the Ukraine.
Right. Now, we've seen, obviously, the wobbles, the financial wobbles of this whole situation just go all across the globe. At the same time, in Russia specifically, that's where the stock market plunged 10%, and the ruble went even further. Clearly, ultimately, Russia is at stake here. The Russian financial situation is at stake here. How long can they hold out? How long can they keep on threatening without actually dealing with their own domestic situation?
I'm not sure the Russians would agree with that. I wouldn't say that they feel that their financial situation is as dire as Ukraine. Let me divide this into two parts.
Right.
You have at the moment the relationship between Russia and the United States. You have Kerry threatening that we're going to impose sanctions. The United States is not even within the 5 big trading partners of Russia. Last year, the figures were around $19 billion in terms of turnover. So those kind of threats of sanctions is not worrying for Russia. But of course, on the other hand, the turmoil that's happening inside Ukraine is affecting the Russian ruble, and that is of concern. The mainstream media seems to think that President Putin wants to invade the Ukraine and that it's in his interest, but precisely because of the reason you're raising, the fact that the Russian economy is in decline is a reason why he will take a step forward and think twice before moving forward. But the point needs to be made that it's almost a balancing balancing act between what Russia does and what Europe does.
Right,
And the Ukraine has almost become a playing ground for President Putin versus President Obama. So Putin might be responding to what Obama does or doesn't do. And the question of the economy might be a second step or not as important in terms of the political decisions that are being made first.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Paula Slyer of RT. Russia Today TV, thank you very much for your comments. We move on now to Canada, where postal workers and the elderly have come out strongly against plans to phase out door-to-door mail delivery in urban areas. This report has the details.
Canada's postmen aren't happy. After losing more than $300 million last year, Canada Post has decided to end home delivery in urban areas. But while the move could save over $500 million a year, it will also get rid of at least 6,000 jobs. The news was a bolt from the blue for postman Guillaume Brodeur.
It was a complete surprise, a real shock, because we never thought that a government-run company would end this essential service.
The plan is that by 2019, Canadians will collect their mail from communal letterboxes like this one. It's an idea that worries senior citizens and the disabled.
I can't go down there. It's fine today, but it's been 4 days since I last went out because of the weather.
Opposition parties claim the move is part of a plan by the Conservative government to make the post office more attractive for a potential privatization.
Raising prices and reducing the service, that's something that Canadians won't put up with. And that's not the way to grow the customer base of Canada Post.
Some analysts believe that what Canada Post needs to do is diversify its services, starting with a move into banking.
I think that we should look into another way, which is broadening services and sources of revenue. There are several options that could be investigated, such as offering financial services in post offices, offering mobile telephony, and perhaps also internet service.
But postmen and women aren't giving up their traditional role just yet, and they feel they're in a strong position.
The federal opposition, the Liberal Party, the New Democratic Party have all clearly spoken against this plan, and Montreal's municipal government is also completely opposed. I think that the top management of Canada Post and the Conservative government have sold the skin of the post office before killing the bear.
In the meantime, Guillaume carries on with his deliveries, but unless Canada Post's plans are overturned, he may not be making the rounds for much longer.
And we're joined now by Daniel Roth for a look at the media in Media Watch. So Daniel, I understand that we're gonna delve into the importance of the Oscars.
The Oscars are very big business.
Yeah.
To start with the sponsorship, as you know, this tweet has been going around the world. Ellen DeGeneres last night took a selfie with a bunch of stars, and it's been retweeted 2.5 million times.
Unbelievable.
And she took it with a Samsung because Samsung's a sponsor of the Oscars. Later on, backstage, she was taking selfies with other people, with Channing Tatum from her iPhone. Anyways, this is one side of the business. The other side of the business is actually the kind of money that movie studios and movies actually make by being Oscar nominated, first of all, which actually conventional wisdom says just being nominated is good enough money in the bank.
To boost your remuneration, so to speak.
Yeah, and winning tops it off. But if you look at Slumdog Millionaire from a few years ago, from their original intake to the nomination intake to the win intake, it was a $100 million jump.
Nice.
$100 million. It's huge. Silver Lining Playbook, about the same, from about 35 million to about 132 million. And it's not true of all movies. Her, which I think won Best Screenplay this year, was up for 5 Oscars. Didn't actually win. It won. It didn't actually take in more money based on its nominations, and it seems to be losing steadily.
Is this a hole in the theory then?
It is a small hole in the theory. I'm not sure why nobody's.
Is it because of maybe of the kinds of things that they're nominated for?
Well, look, Her was up for the writing, and writing usually draws in some crowds. It's not Best Picture. And it's actually, Her is a great example of the new kind of Oscar. In the last decade or so, they've shifted from blockbusters that used to win the Best Picture, used to win most of the Oscars, to you can't call them small independent films,
Right,
but
not
they're
really indie films.
they're lower key in some way. Her is a little lower key than The Return of the King.
Right, right.
You know, Titanic to 12 Years a Slave is it's huge difference in budget, in scope, in subject matter. You know, one of them appealed to teenagers, and one of them appeals mostly to adults. But this is actually the new thing, and what it means, the reason why it's so important, is because the Oscars have become a marketing tool as opposed to a nod that this was a great film or this movie made a lot of money. It's actually a marketing tool now to take your smaller budget, still tens of millions of dollars, and put them out into the world and make them an extra $100 million if they're the big winners.
Okay, well, we're going to have to cut off the millions of dollars here at this point because, well, we're just not making them here. But thank you very much, Daniel Roth. That's all the time we have for you today. I'm Benjamin Changlafares. Please send us your comments via our website and Twitter. And do join us again tomorrow, or be square.